Welcome to Pandas Nightmares. In today's video, you will hear some of the scariest or creepiest things that happen to people. If you do like my content, do like and subscribe as it will help me grow. Since I am a small channel, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And now, let's get started. Enjoy. Story 1. I was on vacation in Ithaca with my boyfriend at the time. We had literally, I'm talking 10 minutes, just gotten into town and stopped at a suspension bridge near Cornell's campus. I'm terrified of heights, and so my boyfriend was coaxing me step by step over the bridge. It was gorgeous, and we stopped at the middle to take a picture. On the side we had come from, there was a parking lot with steps leading to the bottom of the gorge. But on the far side, there were hiking paths with no barrier. A woman walked past us and offered to take a picture for us. We declined, and she smiled and walked quickly to the far side of the bridge, where she smoothly jumped off into the gorge. There was not a second of hesitation. It was almost like she expected the path to keep going. The sound of a person hitting the ground from a jump like that sticks with you. Story 2. A group of friends were staying at this remote cabin that one of my friend's cousins owned. There were no roads leading to the cabin, and it was a good 3/4 day hike from where you parked the cars. I couldn't go at the same time as everyone else due to work obligations, so I decided to head up the same day, but later. It would mean I would have to camp for a night by myself, though the latter part of the trail is too dangerous to be taken at night, especially by someone who doesn't know it. I didn't care. I was kind of looking forward to it, as I've never camped alone before. So I was in the middle of these woods when the sun went down. I got my camp set up in this small clearing, probably 40 feet across, get my campfire going, and pitch my small, one-person tent. Do all that camping stuff like cooking hot dogs on a stick over the fire and s'mores. I probably stay up for a good 2 or 3 hours after dark. It was mid-autumn, so the days were somewhat short. The entire time I thought I heard shit moving in the woods on the edge of the clearing. I didn't think anything of it at first because the woods are full of animals. But as the night went on, I realized that whatever it was just circling the clearing over and over. Once I started paying attention, it made 4 or 5 laps around, before I decided to get up and investigate. The noise stopped as soon as I stooped up, and I thought I heard some sounded going away through the woods. I just shrugged it off, thinking it was some fox that was curious, that got scared when I stood up. I decided it's time to sleep, douse the fire, and climb into my tent. I start to doze off and stay in that half-asleep, half-awake state for a while. I normally hear weird shit when I'm in this state, so I don't think much of it when I hear a voice. Something wakes me all the way up though, and I realize the voice is real and right outside my tent. It's just above a whisper, and I'm not sure if it was another language or if they were just speaking English in such a way that I couldn't understand. I lay there for some time, I don't know how long, listening and waiting for something to happen. There is just enough moonlight to light up the walls of the tent, so I can see when a hand presses into the wall of my tent down near my foot. This freaks me out, and I sit up quickly. Whoever was outside of the tent tore us out of there, like running full sprint through the woods. I get out of the tent and shine my flashlight around and see nothing. I was expecting there to be a bloody handprint on the tent, but nope. Didn't sleep that night, packed up camp at first light that morning, and booked it to the cabin. Story 3. I was about 15 minutes from finishing the night shift at work when there was a massive crash on one of the windows in the office. So I get up and go to check it out. Someone has thrown quite a sizable rock through one of the windows on the front of the building. This is made especially weird because I'm working in the industrial district at 11:30 at night with none of the other businesses open. I go back to my desk, put a quick call through to security to let them know, and decide to head home. As I'm leaving the building, I'm freaking myself out about it more and more, and end up running to my car, getting in, and taking off. I'm almost home, and I've started to calm down a bit when I realized that I didn't unlock my car when I got in. It had been unlocked the whole time. I do a quick check with my hand in the back seat for any possible murderers that might be hanging around there, but there's nothing there. Fast forward 30 minutes. I've called a friend of mine who says he is out drinking, so I decide I'm going to join him. I jump on my bicycle and start riding over. I'm doodling along the road on my bike. It's a nice night, and I'm in no big rush. Just enjoying the moonlight when I hear someone riding behind me. I straighten up and stick to one side of the road. He passes me really slowly, and when he is right beside me, he shoots me a smile I can describe as purely fucking insane. I kind of flinch, and I'm taken aback as he rides on. That's when I realize he is riding my mum's bike. Needless to say, I sprint the fuck home. When I get there, sure enough, her bike is missing, and one of my car's doors is open. The back left one. I was driving, and had no need to open that door. Story 4. I was playing around with a radio once when I was a kid, just slowly spanning through the static, trying to find a station. I'd found an old television antenna, attached it to the side of our house, and ran a wire out my window to it with an alligator clip attached to the radio antenna, allowing me to get a way broader range of signals. So I'm sitting there, early in the morning, like 2 a.m., slowly sweeping frequencies, and suddenly I get to this station that's playing this very weird crackling sound. It sounded sort of like cracking knuckles, or maybe Rice Krispies cereal, but with a fixed, rhythmic pattern instead of being random. I sat there listening to it for a second, then it suddenly stopped, and this faint voice says, "It doesn't work. We're already dead. We're already dead." It took a second for the weight of the words to hit me, but when they did, I freaked the fuck out and almost threw the radio across the room. I'm pretty sure it was just someone messing around with a radio transmitter, but damn if it didn't scare the shit out of me at the time. Story 5. My parents bought their first house back in 1972. It was a fixer-upper, but they decided to move in right away and fix things as time, money permitted. Within a few days of moving in, the new neighbors came over to introduce themselves. They also let my parents know that the previous owners had moved out after a nasty divorce. They had lost their second baby from SIDS, and their relationship went downhill from there. My parents were horrified, more so because they were newly pregnant and couldn't imagine going through such a thing. They eventually pretty much forgot all about it. Life went on. They were in love with their new life and their new house. In preparation for the baby, they decided to wallpaper the nursery. Now, my dad told my mum there was no need in wallpapering the inside of the closet, but she insisted. She was kneeling down, scraping off old paint inside of the closet when her eyes fell upon something that made her blood turn to ice. Written in crayon, at about eye level for a kindergartner in childish scrawl was, "I killed the baby." Story 6. The story of Karen Wetterhahn. Essentially, she was a chemistry professor at Dartmouth. She was working with an organic mercury compound that was relatively unknown at the time. A drop spilled on her gloved hand. No big deal usually. Turns out dimethylmercury penetrates latex gloves really quickly, and a drop on the hand is a death sentence. She slipped into a coma about 6 months later and then died. The really terrifying part is the description of her coma from Wikipedia. One of her former students described it as not being the kind of coma I'd expected. She was thrashing about. Her husband saw tears rolling down her face. I asked if she was in pain. The doctors said it didn't appear that her brain could even register pain. Fucking terrifying. I am so glad I'm not a chemist. Computers are friendly. Story 7. About a year ago, I was climbing a tree in my front yard at around 4:30 a.m. I had walked a lady friend to her car and was killing time until I got the "I'm home" text. and the weather was nice for tree climbing, so I just did it. This particular night, my neighbors didn't lock their gate like they normally do, leaving easy access to their tool shed, lawnmower, etc. I guess the guy forgot. It happens, but it was definitely noticeable. Large gate, right next to the road, expansive, old man tools. So as I observed the gate from my lofty perch and considered all of the reasons it would be open, I noticed a car coming down my street very slowly, eventually coming to a halt right in front of my neighbor's driveway. I looked into the car and saw two young men pointing and looking intently around his yard. Sketchy shit during daylight, much more so at night. After a minute or so of being too nervous to do anything at all, I realized I was leaning pretty heavy on some branches, exposing myself more than when these two had just driven up. That was when it happened. The guy in the passenger seat noticed me first. He did a panicky sort of double take when he first saw me, followed by what I generally assumed to be the words, "Oh shit," and rapidly punching the driver in the arm. Attempting to look menacing, I did the only thing I could think of, which was hold my arms up in a claw-like pose, like a Trirex. When the driver saw me, he did the same panicky double take, before slamming the gas and hauling ass out of Dodge. I like to think I was the creepiest or scariest thing those two ever saw. Story 8. My wife and I used to live in a townhome that backed to some woods. We both took off work one day to get some things done in the yard, cutting the grass, weeding our large flower beds, laying mulch, etc. Our yard wasn't big. It took about 2 full grass clipping bags. I would walk a couple of feet into the woods and dump them in a pile. As I'm walking back to empty the second bag, something in the middle of the woods catches my eye. Something out of place, and it's moving. I crouched down to get a better look, and I just froze. At first, I could make out a pair of shoes just swaying back and forth, and then was able to see the legs and body of a teenager. There, in the middle of the woods, was a teenage boy who had hung himself. Next to the tree, I could see a skateboard leaning up against it. I yelled for my wife to call the police and started running back to try and save him, but he was gone. His body was limp and his head was just slumped over. His dark, scruffy hair was slowly blowing in the breeze. The cops came and quickly cut him down, and they were gone. As it turns out, he was having problems getting along with his parents, and this is what he decided to do. Story 9. This was a few years ago on a night scuba dive. There were 8 of us in the group, including our dive master and his assistant. We had just finished our dive and were gathered up in a circle, ready to ascend and get out of the water when my dive master freezes. He takes his flashlight and, pointing it outside our circle of divers, he catches something circling us with the beam. Turns out, it was a 12-foot-long great white shark. At this point, half of the group are trying to keep the shark illuminated as it circles us, and remarkably, everyone stayed calm. The only things going through my mind were iterations of these 2 thoughts. Don't look like a yummy, delicious, fatty seal, and that I hope I taste terrible. My dive master gets our attention and slowly puts his thumb up and then makes an upward motion. We all begin to ascend, and the shark kept with us until we were maybe 10 feet from the surface. Then it turned off into the darkness and was gone. I did not go back into the ocean for about a week after that. Story 10. Not creepy, but this is as scared as I've even been. I was fixing a jumped belt on an old Gleaner K2 in the middle of the field, in the middle of the night, when my dog, a 110-pound Labrador, who's usually sniffing for birds when I stop, is standing still and letting out a growl I've never heard from him. I shine my almost dead flashlight where he's looking, and I see 3 sets of eyes change quickly from a glow to a silhouette to coyotes. They're pretty harmless on their own, but in a pack they're relentless. I call for my dog and bolt for the cab, but he runs at them instead. I stood on the platform for what felt like hours, as my dog tried to fight off the now 5 coyotes. I couldn't let my buddy die, so I grabbed the hammer and wrapped my jacket around my arm. The second I got close, one of them went for my leg, and I offered my arm instead, which it gladly took, and I swung down on its back with all my might. Second coyote, same as the first, grabs my arm and I swing at his back. The other three are switching between fighting and dragging my dog into the corn, and like an idiot, I throw the hammer at the pack with no effect. I kick the one doing the most dragging, and he thankfully runs off. I picked up the hammer and swing at the one my dog doesn't have, and stood back and watched my dog chase off the fifth. He came back bloody and limping, but no worse for wear. But even with a rabies shot, he started showing symptoms about a week later. Toughest thing I had to do to date was putting that dog down. Story 11. I used to work in a trailer park for my parents. Quite often, people would start using methamphetamine, begin to fall behind on rent, and get evicted. Whenever we evicted someone, their trailer was usually too torn to shit to actually do anything useful with it. Essentially, to prevent having a pile of shit trailer in the middle of the park, we'd buy it from them and just tear it down. Anyway, the scary, creepy part. Many of these occupants had children. More than half of all of the children's rooms I found had locks on the doors, from the outside. Inside the children's rooms, it was always quite evident that the kids would sometimes be locked inside for days at a time, due to the bathroom corners that would sometimes appear. The doors on the insides of the rooms typically had scratch marks along the edge of the door and the door frame. Getting rid of all of the stuff inside before beginning demolition always frightened me. I was always afraid that I'd end up finding a dead child somewhere among the filth. It never happened, but the odds of it potentially happening were, in my opinion, quite high. Story 12. One of the scariest things I ever heard was when I worked in retail. My store used to do layaway, and that was where I worked. Right by the layaway counter we had 3 bathrooms. A men's multi-stall, a women's multi-stall, and a family bathroom. Well, only the family bathroom had a door that locked, all the others had the push-pull swing door. I was in the back cleaning up and I thought, I hear screaming. So I walked out front by the counter. I heard more screaming. I was not sure at first where it was coming from. I ran and checked the men's and women's bathroom, and they were empty. And I still heard the crying and screaming. It was coming from the family bathroom. I banged on the door, but the yelling, screaming, crying kept going on. It sounded like a child, and I had no idea what was going on. I called for a manager because I had no way of getting in the door since it was locked. This whole time there is still crying, screaming, banging. After several attempts of trying to open the door, we called 911. We had no idea what was going on, but it didn't sound good. I think about 15 minutes at this point, although it felt forever. Then the sound check stopped. No more banging, crying, nothing. We banged on the door until the police came. When they finally did, they had to kick the door in since we had no key. As we all stood around and looked in, all we saw was blood all over the place. We were not really sure what happened at first, but the police told us to back up, and that is when they pulled out a lady and a child. A bloody child, maybe 3. We all just stood there in shock. The child was not moving. We thought he was dead because of all the blood. They took the lady away in handcuffs and the child to the hospital. We all had to give statements. Later, my manager told me what happened. The just snapped. He wouldn't stop crying, and she just had enough and did whatever she could to make him stop. He did live. I was sure he was dead. But he wasn't. She had just knocked him out from hitting him so hard. This story is not scary in the ghost sense. But for that to happen right behind the door and not know what is going on or be able to help was pretty scary to me. Story 13. A few years back, I rented an apartment from a friend of mine. He had recently bought it and had it completely renovated. He put it up for sale but couldn't find a buyer, so I offered to rent it in the meantime. After moving in, I realized there was something wrong with the lady next door. She was about 45 but looked much older. She would sit up all night, listening to Christian radio shows and talking loudly to someone. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep. So I went over to her place and asked her to keep it down. She opened her door and I got a quick peek. Her walls all had crosses painted on them in different colors, and words like Jesus and angels scribbled everywhere. The windows were painted black, letting no light in at all. It was damp, yellow-stained 50-year-old carpets, dog shit and cockroaches everywhere. No dog though. I asked her to please keep it down. She just looked at me and shut the door. Then she turned up the radio even louder. The next night I had my GF staying over. I wake up in the middle of the night and see a shadow of a person next to the bed looking at us sleeping. I think I'm hallucinating, as I usually do in the dark when I'm sleepy. But then the shadow starts talking. It's my neighbor and she's holding something in her hand. She broke in during the night and who knows how long she stood there. "You should lock your door at night," she says, and walks out. The next morning I hear someone making strange noises below my bedroom window. It's my neighbor talking to herself in tongue. She has a plastic bag in her hand with her rotting dead dog inside. It's hot as hell outside and I can smell death from the bag. At this point, I'm scared shitless. She's obviously very insane. I go upstairs and knock on another person's door and ask what the hell is going on. The guy is as scared as me. Apparently, she broke into his apartment one evening as well while he was watching TV with his kids. He got up from the couch to get a snack, only to find her behind the couch staring at him, holding a power drill. Now I know what was in her hand. At this stage, I'm basically pooping myself. I call the cops, and they know all about her. Apparently, she is a violent schizophrenic, and she hasn't taken her meds. But they can't force her or enter her apartment without her permission because she owns it. The only thing they can do is get her when she goes outside. I sit up for the next 2 days, waiting for her to run out of cigarettes. When I hear her leave at 2 a.m. to go across the road to the 7-Eleven, I call the cops. They have 3 cars and a special van over in less than 2 minutes. They restrain her and throw her in the van and drive off to some institution, and in less than a minute, it's like she was never there. I never see her again. Still have nightmares about her looking at me in my sleep. Story 14. When I was 7, I woke up in the middle of the night with an earache. I decided to tell my mom and stepdad and walked out of my room. Someone was sitting on the chair in the living room about 3 feet away from my bedroom door. The person looked strange, the face was just kind of distorted. But it was dark and I couldn't see well. "Mom?" I asked. The person shook their head and I started getting scared. "Mike?" The person shook their head again. I decided the best course of option was to go back to bed, so I wouldn't have to walk past this person. I climbed in bed and closed my eyes for a second before opening them and seeing the person standing in my doorway, smiling madly and nodding furiously. Story 15. My dad died of cancer the day I turned 16 after about 2 weeks in a coma. It was really fast, less than 2 months between diagnosis and death. He died in the house. We had a hospice attendant, and my mom was very good about seeing to him in those final days. Anyway, a lot of weird shit happened after he passed, but the one that still freaks me out when I think about it happened about 12 hours before he took to bed for the last time. He was in our living room napping on the couch, while my mum was in the kitchen cooking. No one else was home. Suddenly, he jerked awake and was shouting for my mum in a very loud, agitated voice, clearly angry with her. "Beverly, don't do that. Don't ever do that again." She ran into the room, alarmed, and asked what he was talking about. And he said, "Don't do that. Don't walk past me like that in that long, black wig." Sometimes I think he saw death. Story 16. My old co-worker had a son that was in his mid-30s, and he had a son named Hunter that was 4 or 5. She said that Hunter would have bad dreams, and that he would sleep with his dad when he got scared. One night his dad woke up because he heard Hunter calling him, but he was calling him by his name, not Dad. So he went to his room and he was asleep. He woke him up and said, "Hunter, you were calling me? Is everything okay?" And Hunter said, "Dad, when they call you, you're not supposed to answer," and fell back asleep. He asked him about it in the morning, but he said he didn't remember saying it. I get chills when I think about it. Story 17. While not actually eerie, it was probably the most scared I've ever felt in a moment. When I was about 13 or 14, I woke up in the middle of the night, needing to go to the bathroom. I had one of those bunk beds, but where, instead of a bottom bunk, there's a desk. For whatever reason, I started psyching myself out really badly. I sat up in my bed, staring into the pitch blackness, imagining a man with a knife standing under my bed, ready to kill me as soon as I put a foot down the ladder. Or a torn-faced ghost girl in the hallway. Or someone smiling and bloody at the turn into my bathroom. Basically the usual freaky images. I tortured myself for a solid 20 minutes, then used another 10 to try and convince myself of being stupid and go to the bathroom. When I finally felt ready, I carefully stepped down the ladder, holding my breath, ready to feel my foot get harshly grabbed. I continued to the bathroom, slow and completely on edge. Well, I guess my mum was going to the bathroom at the time too, because she was right there in the hallway and she bumped into me. For the state of mind I was in at that time, getting bumped into just set me over the edge. I collapsed in the hallway in shock, started crying, and peed all over myself. My mum was stunned and apologetic, but not without a great deal of laughter and mockery first. Story 18. EMT here. I have a ton of these kind of stories, but this one sticks out the best. Warning, NSFW language. This call is from a few years ago. Our ambulance is dispatched to a residence for a male with leg pain. My partner and I walk in, and seated in the recliner is an older, African-American male with a cast on his left leg. He tells us he was in a motorcycle accident a few weeks ago and broke his leg and was discharged from the hospital a couple of nights ago. He says he tripped over the coffee table and banged his bad leg again really hard and wanted to go back to the ER and have them check it out, just to make sure he didn't re-injure himself. So, after boring medical terminology here, we're off to the local hospital. Talking with him in the back, he seemed like a pretty chill guy. We're bullshitting back and forth about motorcycles, his ER visit, his ex-wife, and was just generally an easygoing guy. Halfway to the hospital though, he suddenly stops talking and holds his hand out to me like he wants to shake my hand. I take his hand, and as I give him a firm handshake, he looks me straight in the eyes and says the creepiest thing I have ever heard. "Thank you for everything you are about to do for me." His eyes then begin to bulge out of his sockets. He starts foaming at the mouth and starts screaming at the top of his lungs. "I'm gonna take a diabetic shit on your donkey dick, you cracker lover. Fuck me in the ass. Fuck me now." Just over and over again for about a solid 45 seconds, maybe a minute. Then he stops, throws up all over himself, then collapses on the stretcher, unconscious. I literally just sat there the entire time in total shock and fear until he collapsed. Took a breath, checked my pants, told my partner to start driving faster, then began providing manual respirations to make sure he kept breathing. Crazy thing is, I'm talking to one of the ER nurses after we dropped him off, and she told me the same exact thing happened when he was in there earlier, and none of the doctors could figure out what it was. Story 19. To really get my story, you have to have an understanding of my third floor landing. There's a single set of stairs that lead up to it. Once on the landing, it's a T-shape, with an office to the left, my bedroom to the right, and straight ahead is a bathroom with a shower. Anyway, one night, approximately 10 p.m., I'm taking a shower before I head to sleep. The glass panels on my shower is that concave, convex glass that blurs everything. So everything was blurred and unclear. I glance at the door and I see some kind of hand-like figure. Now, it was pitch black, so right there it freaked me out. Because I come from a family of pale white Welsh people. What freaked me out more was how the hand seemed to come through the door. Or at least an angle where whomever the hand belonged to would be visible. All it did was hit the lights. That's it. No noise, no attack or anything. It just turned off the fucking lights. So there I am. I just witnessed a phantom hand, and now I'm in my shower and it's pitch fucking black. I've never been so chilled to the bone before. Something about being in the darkness of the night, with the only noise being the water hitting the floor beneath me, just reduced me to the most primal state of pure fear I've ever been in. I eventually get myself to leave the shower and hit the lights. The relief that came over me was immense. I've never been able to explain it. The stairs up to the landing are old and creak like hell. I would have heard someone come and go down. No one was in my room or the office. Weirder still, nothing like it has happened since. Story 20. I'm a journalist and was told this doozy by a woman I interviewed for a true crime story. When this woman was a young girl, say 8 years old, she started to come downstairs at night to tell her father that there was a man in her closet. He tells her there's no such thing as the bogeyman and sends her back to bed. This happens on and off for like a week. Finally, he gets frustrated and walks her back to the room and says, "I'll show you there's nothing in your closet," and goes to open the door. It opens an inch and then he feels someone slam it shut. Turns out there really was a man in her closet. This guy was a perv who would come into the house every night and stare at the girl from the closet while she slept. The dad kicked the shit out of him and the perv went to prison for many years. I researched his story 20 years after this happened. The guy had just gotten out of jail again and no one could find him. That is all for today. If you have enjoyed this video, do like and subscribe. I post 4 to 5 times a week or more, so if you like listening to stories while you work, I got you. Hope you have an absolutely amazing. You can check my other videos on screen.